It's just after 3 a.m. on May 4th, 2010, in a quiet Florida suburb called Oviedo. A 911 dispatcher picks up a call. On the other end is a woman, breathless, half crying. She says one sentence that changes everything. "I just shot my husband." Within minutes, police are pulling into the driveway of a rented house. They find the woman outside, sitting on the front walkway, not running, not hiding, just sitting there, crying, repeating the same words over and over. Inside, in the bedroom, is a man, shot twice, dead. Here's what makes this case so strange. The woman never denied pulling the trigger. Not that night, not ever. What she disputed, what a jury, then an appeals court, then a second set of prosecutors would spend 11 years fighting over, was why. Was this a woman who killed the man raping her to save her own life? Or was this a calculated killer who staged a crime scene in the minutes after murdering her husband? By the end of this video, you'll have heard both sides, the evidence, the confession that almost didn't come out, and the single mistake that a defense lawyer admitted, under oath, may have cost his client everything. Stick around, because the twist in the middle of this case is one of the strangest in true crime. Before we get into it, if you're new here, hit subscribe, because we cover cases like this every week, and you don't want to miss the next one. Let's start with the man who died, because in a lot of true crime stories, the victim gets forgotten. Robert Klein doesn't deserve that. Robert served as a combat medic during the Gulf War, attached to an airborne infantry unit. Think about what that means. His entire job was keeping other soldiers alive under fire. He came home, married a woman named Deborah, and they had 2 children together. In 2003, Deborah died suddenly of a heart attack. Robert became a single father overnight, raising 2 kids on his own. A couple of years later, the exact year is disputed, somewhere around 2004 or 2005, Robert met a woman named Anita Smithey. He worked in sales. She was a database programmer. She was also a single parent, going through her own divorce, raising 2 children of her own. They connected. 2 people who'd both lost a version of family, trying to build a new one. On May 6th, 2007, they got married. 4 kids, 2 families, 1 house. For a moment, just a moment, it looked like a second chance for everybody involved. Quick question for you. Have you ever seen a second chance family that actually worked out the way everyone hoped? Drop it in the comments, because in this case, it did not. Here's where the story splits into 2 completely different versions, and it never really comes back together. Anita's side. She told police, and later a courtroom, that Robert changed after the wedding. She described a man who became controlling, obsessive, and increasingly aggressive. She said he was addicted to marijuana. She said he punched holes in the walls. She said he dictated details of her life she should never have had to explain, down to what she wore to work. By 2010, she said, she'd had enough. She filed for divorce and moved out with her 2 kids into a rented home in Oviedo, Robert's family's side. They reject every bit of that. To them, Anita was not a woman escaping abuse. She was, in their words, someone who knew how to play the victim when it benefited her. Robert's sister, who happened to be a sheriff's deputy, later said she'd watched Anita describe a previous husband as abusive too, without ever taking any of the steps someone in real danger usually takes. In their version of events, the drinking and the household tension came from Anita, not Robert. 2 families, 2 completely opposite stories about the same marriage. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Nobody outside that house will ever know which version is true. Not the jury, not the appeals court, not us. What both sides do agree on is this. By spring of 2010, Anita and Robert were separated. Divorce paperwork was moving forward, but they hadn't actually stopped seeing each other. According to Anita, there was a pattern. On nights when her kids were with their father, Robert would come by, often for sex, even though on paper, their marriage was already over. She says she told him more than once not to come. She says he came anyway. So here's a question worth sitting with before we go further. If two people are separated, filing for divorce, but still sleeping together, how do you even define what happened next? Keep that in your head, because it's the exact question that would end up deciding this case. Quick pause before we get into the night everything happened. If this case has you hooked already, smash that like button. It genuinely helps this video reach more people. And if you're not subscribed yet, now's a good time. We break down a new true crime case just like this, every single week. Drop a comment telling me which side you believe so far, Team Anita or Team Robert. Okay, let's go back to that house. On the night of May 3rd, 2010, Robert showed up at Anita's rented house, shortly before midnight. There was no sign of forced entry. However he got in, it wasn't by breaking a window or kicking a door. By Anita's own account to detectives, the night started out almost ordinary. He brought a bottle of tequila. He helped set up her cable TV. They had a drink, watched an episode of a crime show together, and started kissing. According to court records, this was part of a pattern. The two had a history of role play in their sex life, including consensual rape role play, along with regular sex. They went to the bedroom. They had consensual sex. And then, this is where the two stories permanently split. Anita's version. Afterward, she showered. When she came back to the bedroom, Robert wanted to keep going. She didn't. According to her account, he became enraged, pulled a knife, held it to her, beat her, and sexually assaulted her, this time without her consent. She says at some point she became convinced he was going to kill her. She managed to get a handgun from her nightstand. She warned him. And then, in her telling, as he leaned back toward her, the gun went off. Twice. The prosecution's version, no knife, no second assault. In their theory, the second round of contact was part of the same consensual role-play dynamic the couple had used before. Robert simply didn't leave when Anita wanted him to, and at some point during an argument, she armed herself and shot him, not to survive an attack, but to end a fight that had gone too far. One detail the prosecution leaned on hard in closing arguments. At one point during that night, Robert got up to retrieve lubricant. The state argued that's not something an attacker does. That's something a considerate partner does. And while he was up getting it, they argued, Anita was quietly arming herself. Robert died from 2 gunshot wounds. The second one severed his aorta. That was the fatal shot. Here's the question this whole case comes down to. Can two people tell 2 totally different stories about the exact same 10 minutes and both genuinely believe they're telling the truth? Let me know what you think in the comments. We're about to look at the evidence that was supposed to settle it. When this case finally went to trial in November 2014, 4.5 years after the shooting, everyone expected the physical evidence to settle it. It didn't. The county medical examiner testified for the prosecution. He confirmed Robert died from the second gunshot. He also said that after the first shot, Robert likely would have been in too much pain to keep coming at Anita aggressively, which undercut part of her self-defense claim. But the real battleground was the cuts on Anita's own body, wounds to her neck, face, and abdomen. The state's medical examiner called them hesitation wounds, a term used to describe injuries that look self-inflicted. The theory: when someone cuts themselves, their body instinctively flinches, so the cuts tend to be shallow and hesitant. He testified there was no evidence anyone else had caused them. The defense brought in their own expert, who reached the opposite conclusion, that the torso wounds were not self-inflicted and were consistent with a sexual assault. And then there was a detail even the prosecution's own witness supported. The sexual assault nurse who examined Anita hours after the shooting testified that injuries to her groin were consistent with sexual assault. That witness was called by the prosecution, not the defense. So by the end of the medical evidence, here's where things stood. One expert said self-inflicted. One expert said assault. And the prosecution's own nurse found signs consistent with assault. That's not a slam dunk for either side. That's a tie. And when a court case ends in a tie on the physical evidence, it usually comes down to something else entirely. What the accused person actually said, in their own words, in the hours right after it happened. That's exactly what happened here. and it's the turning point of this entire case. After the 911 call, Anita was taken to the hospital, treated for bruising and her cuts, and given a sexual assault exam. She'd reportedly been awake for around 36 hours straight. From there, she was brought to the police station and interviewed. Jurors would later watch the full recording of that interview. At some point deep into that interview, Anita told detectives something that would define the rest of her life. The cuts on her torso weren't from Robert at all. She said she'd inflicted them on herself, after the shooting, because she was afraid nobody would believe she'd actually been attacked. Her defense has always argued that statement wasn't a real confession. It was an exhausted, traumatized woman, fresh off a sexual assault exam, saying whatever she thought might get her out of that interrogation room. And here's the part that matters most, legally. At one point during that interview, Anita told the detective she no longer wanted to answer questions. In plain terms, she invoked her right to remain silent. The detective kept questioning her anyway. Because of that, the trial judge ruled the statement inadmissible. Legally, the jury was never supposed to hear that Anita said she cut herself. As far as the law was concerned, that confession didn't exist. But, and this is the twist that makes this case genuinely unusual, the judge left one door open. If the defense did anything at trial to suggest to the jury that Robert had caused those wounds, the state would be allowed to bring the suppressed statement back in, to correct the record. It was a trapdoor, and the defense's entire strategy depended on never stepping on it. Then the defense played Anita's original 911 call for the jury. Think about why that seems like a good idea. It's her raw, panicked voice, moments after the shooting. It's the kind of audio that can make a jury feel sympathy fast. But in that call, Anita told the 911 operator that Robert had stabbed her. That statement directly contradicted the confession the judge had ruled out, the one where she admitted she'd cut herself. By playing the 911 call, the defense had just opened the exact door the judge warned them about. The prosecution moved immediately to bring the suppressed statement back into evidence. The judge agreed. The confession that was never supposed to reach the jury came roaring back in Anita's own recorded voice, right at the moment the state needed it most. One of Anita's own lawyers would later admit, under oath, that he had simply forgotten she'd told the 911 operator she was stabbed, and that if he'd remembered, he never would have played that call. Sit with that for a second. A defense team, trying to help their client, may have handed the prosecution the single most damaging piece of evidence in the entire case. By accident. Anita did not testify in her own defense. After roughly 3 hours of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. Guilty of second-degree murder. Anita collapsed in the courtroom. Her family cried out behind her. Across the aisle, Robert's family cried too, but for them, it was relief. After 4.5 years of waiting. Two families who had once shared a house sat on opposite sides of the same courtroom, grieving completely different griefs at the exact same moment. In February 2015, the judge sentenced Anita to 40 years in prison. The defense had asked for the minimum, 25 years. Robert's daughter called her father a superhero to the court. Anita's father had sold the family farm to help pay for her legal defense. For a while, that looked like the end of the story. But it wasn't. Because years later, Anita's appellate lawyers made one specific argument, that the jury should never have heard that confession at all, and that her own trial lawyers had made the mistake that let it in. In December 2020, 6 years after the trial, the 5th District Court of Appeal reversed Anita's conviction in a split 2-1 decision. The majority ruled that playing the 911 call and letting the suppressed confession back in as a result was a mistake serious enough to undo the entire trial. One judge disagreed, calling it one isolated error in an otherwise strong defense. The majority ruling won. Anita was granted a new trial, but a second trial, over a decade later, would be harder for everyone. Witnesses' memories fade, evidence ages, and Robert's family would have to live through it all over again. So in May 2021, instead of going back to trial, Anita pleaded no contest to second-degree murder. She was sentenced to the 6.5 years she'd already served, plus 10 years of probation, with a suspended 25-year sentence hanging over her if she ever violates it. She walked out of the courtroom, a free woman. Strip away the appeals, the rulings, the decade of legal arguments, and what's left is smaller and harder to sit with. A man went to a house he'd been asked not to come to. A woman shot him. He died. She lived. They were the only two people who ever really knew what happened in that room, and one of them never got to tell his side. Robert Klein survived a war as a man whose entire job was saving lives. He didn't survive a Monday night at home. Anita Smithey served 6.5 years and walked out under a sentence that could still close around her at any time. So here's the question I want to leave you with. When the physical evidence can't decide a case, and it comes down to one recorded sentence from an exhausted person in an interrogation room at 3 a.m., is that justice, or is that just whoever made the smaller mistake? Let me know what you honestly think down in the comments. If you made it this far, thank you for watching the whole thing. That actually means a lot for this channel. Hit subscribe if you haven't. Like this video if you want to see more cases like this one, and I'll see you in the next video. Sniff.